The standard scientific view of reality treats the universe as a purely material place, a collection of tangible, familiar objects. In this framework, the universe operates like a predictable machine. We parse the world into things we can use, tools and functional items, and we filter out almost everything else just to get from point A to point B. But this sterile perspective hits a wall when it tries to explain the primary fact of human experience: consciousness. Neuroscientists still can't figure out how the physical brain produces our internal life. A purely material view struggles to conceptualize the reality of an emotion, a motivation, or a dream. To capture those incredibly real, chaotic aspects of life, we have to look outside scientific theories. We have to look at stories. Myths and narratives actually have an identifiable structure, a grammar, that maps out how we encounter the unexpected. These narrative structures aren't new. The earliest stories we know go back thousands of years. Even a modern children's tale like Pinocchio contains deep psychological echoes from our ancient past, representing truths that are older than written history. If we want to understand how to face the parts of our lives that don't fit into neat, rational boxes, we need to learn how to read this ancient grammar. We have to understand what the stories are actually telling us to do. Take the classic children's book, There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. A young boy named Billy wakes up one morning to find a small kitten-sized dragon sitting right in his bedroom. When Billy goes downstairs to tell his mother, she brushes him off. She states firmly that dragons do not exist. Since there's no such thing as a dragon, she refuses to acknowledge it, even as it starts eating Billy's pancakes. Because the adults studiously ignore it, the creature begins to grow. By noon, the dragon is so massive it occupies the entire house, eventually ripping the home right off its foundation and running down the street. The story points to a specific psychological reality. Problems we refuse to name do not vanish. They take on a life of their own, compounding in the background until they completely consume our space. You can see this play out in everyday life. If you walk into a house where a deep marital conflict is being ignored, the tension is palpable. Getting even the simplest task done becomes impossible because the household is jammed to the rafters with unfinished business. Think about what happens if you stop paying a bill. At first, it's a tiny piece of paper, but if you ignore it, you quickly discover that the bill is attached to an immense, aggressive industrial complex designed to force you to pay. At the absolute extreme end of this avoidance is post-traumatic stress disorder. When someone encounters a truly terrible event and cannot resolve the threat, their brain repeatedly presents the terrifying memory, trapping them in a state of paralysis. This state of perpetual alarm is biologically destructive. Cortisol levels shoot up, and in high doses, it acts as a neurotoxin, physically damaging the brain. The dragon embodies the terrifying unexpected, the chaotic force that emerges the moment our map of reality fails us. In the animal kingdom, survival depends on confronting that chaos. If a lab rat is terrified by a predator, it will initially freeze. But eventually, the rat will cautiously venture out to map the dangerous territory. It investigates the threat instead of permanently running from it. This same principle applies to human trauma. Clinical psychologist Edna Foa developed a highly effective treatment for PTSD patients by having them voluntarily relive their most terrifying experiences in vivid detail. They face the memory directly until they process the fear. We see the exact same mechanism in treating severe phobias. When an agoraphobic patient is terrified of elevators, a therapist doesn't force them inside. They start at a safe distance. Then they move forward, step by step, gradually closing the gap. Through this exposure, the patient discovers they are capable of facing a terrifying situation without being destroyed by the confrontation. The clinical evidence is clear. Confronting the unknown voluntarily is the only effective way to stop the chaos from expanding and consuming your world. This principle scales up from personal anxieties to massive social dragons. We can look at the life of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a man who found himself crushed by a mid-20th century tyranny. Solzhenitsyn survived the brutal realities of the Eastern Front during World War II, only to be captured and starved in German prisoner of war camps. Instead of a hero's welcome when the war ended, he was betrayed by his own government. Fearing that returning veterans were influenced by Western ideas, dictator Joseph Stalin threw Solzhenitsyn and countless others straight into the Soviet Gulag system. Sitting on a coal pile in a concentration camp, starving and beaten, Solzhenitsyn made a remarkable decision. Instead of cursing the state, he took absolute personal responsibility for his position. He decided to mentally comb through his entire past and try to undo every moral knot he had tied in his own soul. Because he had no paper, he memorized his thoughts. The consequence of that internal investigation was a sprawling 1,900-page manuscript called the Gulag Archipelago. When it was finally published in the West, the book exposed the brutal reality of the camps to the world. One individual's absolute refusal to ignore the darkness in himself and his society dealt a fatal ideological blow to a world-spanning empire. This brings us right back to the mythology. There is a reason that ancient stories almost always feature a terrifying, fire-breathing creature sitting on a massive hoard of gold. That treasure represents the exact thing you need to move forward. The latent strength, competence, and wisdom you require are always embedded directly inside the things you are most afraid to face. You cannot run from the chaos. You have to investigate it voluntarily. You have to stand your ground, face the threat, and integrate a piece of that aggressive energy into your own character to defend yourself. Taking on that responsibility means letting go of the comfortable illusions you used to rely on. To build a truly resilient life, you have to let your old, avoidant self die, so that a stronger, far more courageous version of you can take its place.